All right, I just wanted to jump on and riff something real quick. I started watching this Prime guy recently, mainly because he makes me feel stupid as fuck. Never be the smartest person in the room. He said something during this video about sprints being the biggest mistake of software engineering that really resonated with me. And it hit home hard because when you get to the point in your career that I have, or a lot of people have, you find yourself coming up against more non-technical problems than you do technical problems, or at least the technical problems are things that you can solve easily or you're more familiar with, that you've done a million times. The company structure problems, the methodology problems are often some of the biggest headaches and actually end up informing the technical decision making in a lot of companies, more so than it should do. And something I was looking at recently, actually, which is probably worth putting up, is Conway's Law. And Conway's Law is, I should probably get this off the screen. Conway's Law is a law that describes the link between communication structures of an organization and the systems that they design. It's named after a computer programmer, blah, 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 blah. But the law is based on the reasoning that in order for a product to function, the authors and designers of the components must communicate with each other in order to ensure the compatibility between the components. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, complex products end up shaped like organizational structures that they're designed in or for. The law is applied primarily to a field of software architecture, though Conway directed it more broadly, and it is assumed the conclusions apply to most technical fields. So basically, the structure of your organization, the way it communicates and the way it does stuff, which is relevant to this conversation about sprints, often enforces and implies. And I find myself quite often hitting these friction points where coming up against an imposed structure or imposed methodology that's actually hindering the design and hindering the technical approach. And he said something here, can't quite remember what it was, but we're going to find out. I'm not going to watch the whole video, just kind of skipped in a little bit, and hopefully it prompts something.
Burnout worse. Like, I don't think Agile itself leads to or doesn't lead to burnout. Let's blame Agile for everything. Yeah, I mean, understandably, Agile is like that kid that always tells too much and you just want to punch him. That's real. I understand that.
Definitely.
The problem I have with just like whenever someone says like Agile is actually great or Agile can be, like you're talking about Scrum, not Agile. The problem is that Scrum is an implementation of Agile in some sense. It's the attempt to codify what Agile is into a thing into a set of things people.
It's like an actionable version of it.
Can do. And that becomes increasingly more and more difficult. Kanban is another one of these, but Kanban can feel equally as like miserable as Scrum is.
It can feel as miserable, but it also depends on the size of the projects and the size of what it is that you do. And sometimes Kanban, in my opinion, or in my experience, can be a way of actually streamlining some of that process that gets rammed down your throat that you have in Scrum. All the ceremonies, all that other bullshit. So Kanban can sometimes be a way of going, look, hey, I am tracking what I'm doing. We're not just going off and building stuff. Like, this is it. We move it across. But if, as Prime describes, you get into this kind of infinite hell of tickets from left to right, then yeah, it's a bit of an
right. It can be equally miserable because Kanban, in some sense, I find Kanban almost worse because it's just like you're literally so replaceable that you're just a cog that takes off the top of the list. Like, that's your value,
left
is that
right.
you are just like,
left to right.
How do we effectively drive software engineering into what LLMs should do? Right? It's just like, we're going to break down the task as small as possible, and you're going to just shove through these things on just like a fire hose, right? Kanban is never-ending torture.
Which is no fun for
Absolutely.
anyone. But
if it's a small project,
if it's a small project, then it's a nice way to kind of communicate that transparency with twitchy product owners and twitchy project managers, etc., without having to be like, go through all of those processes. I mean, often those processes are adhered to as well. Depends on your implementation of any of these crazy methodologies, but yeah, in my experience, it's kind of like a bit of a middle ground between these overarching organizational processes and actually getting stuff done. You pay me to get stuff done. Let me get stuff done.
Personal favorite way to develop things is that you get together with the people you're trying to develop with.
And this is the key point. This is the key point, and this is something that doesn't often happen, and it really depends on the organization that you work in and the structures that you work around. But this is it.
Set a set of like goals, and then you come back a week later and you talk about how are your like progress towards the goals going, and any roadblock or anything you have in the way, you reach out to the team members individually. You don't do any sort of planning. You don't do anything. Of course, that's Agile. That's the problem with Agile. Agile has such a broad definition.
I think we're talking about Agile as a, what is it? An adjective? Like, are you agile? Like, are you able to move? Do you have agility versus agile, which is, the way of communicating, the way of building software. So it's like the difference between the real world and the real word and
definition. It's only part of Agile. It's one definition, which is a team should set forward its own thing, right?
Self-organizing teams that are responsible for what they do and they get it done.
That's it. Just set a goal. As a team, we set one goal, one thing we want to make. We want to improve the reliability of service X. Go.
But this is where Conway's law comes in, because this is only achievable and only possible if your organization is structured in a way that is flexible enough to facilitate that. Because you've got this whole pipeline, especially when you work in something like an agency, you've got this whole pipeline of sales, you've got clients, you've got billable hours, you've got blah, 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 blah. Things that mean that there's this kind of like top-down, trickle-down approach to getting stuff through the door and expensed and then resourced and then worked on. That's where this assumption of doing this properly, and this is where I think a lot of people lean on this thing called agency agile, which is another crazy implementation that doesn't really work either.
And make it happen, team. Right? Fail fast. But it's not a sprint. Like I don't think check-ins, or I don't think like tasks and extreme breakdowns work, right? If everybody's held accountable for what they do.
Key point, held accountable. And this is something that's controversial and tricky. And he goes on to say here, that we'll hear in a second, that you've got to hold them accountable. And if it doesn't work, time to go. This works well somewhere like Netflix, where they've got developers pouring in the door, ready to go, will work for whatever. And obviously they do work for good amounts of money, 100 to 400, 500K a year US. They're lining up around the block to get this done. This isn't the reality for all places of work, especially in the UK.
And every last person wants to see change and works hard.
You have to incentivize the staff, not only from a financial perspective, but from an ego perspective almost, or like a passion perspective. Like you have to have people that are invested in what they're doing, and often they are, but they have to be empowered to be invested. And that means the design and the self-organization and the energy of what it is that they're going to build, has to be validated, but it also has to be wanted by the people that are doing it.
You don't need all these rules, right? And when
you shouldn't need all the rules, but often you do need the rules because of the people that you're working around, because of the different varying skill levels, because of the different experience levels. And yeah, we'll get on to my main point.
People aren't doing it, you're protective of the team, and you talk to them, you address issues, and eventually you have to let them go. Like, it's that simple.
You should have.
I'm going to Agile these nuts across your face, right? Such hard stuff. Well, you have to create the team. You have to create the team you want, right?
You do. You do, but that's easier said than done. Like I said, Netflix, super easy.
Anyone that thinks you can't create the team, then that's a problem.
You have to have the budget.
This assumes,
you have to have the availability.
Again, you are the reason why teams have to be held.
Exactly. You're not just the reason that teams have to be held accountable. You're the reason that your team sucks. You have to be the person you want to be. You have to be the change you want to see.
Accountable, right? You have to find people like yourself that hold people accountable, And that's that.
But what do you do if you're in a position where you don't have that and you aren't in a position to get rid of the people or find new people? You have to work with what you've got. And this is where the responsibility and the onus comes on you. You have to be the driving force behind it, because it's all well and good. I assume most of the lifers or 10-year developers, engineers at Netflix are all super passionate, super intelligent. This Prime guy makes me feel stupid as fuck, and that's why I like working with him, watching him. I'd love to work with him, but that isn't always the case, and that's kind of the main point. The main takeaway is that we have to be responsible. You can't complain about it. You have to hold other people accountable, and if that means having awkward conversations, uncomfortable conversations, you have to do it. Otherwise, change will never happen, because it's not going to come from the top down, because the top already has their structure. They've already set out how it's going to happen. They might not have any idea how that's going to impact the software that's built, but boy, they've already got it in place. They're focused on the numbers. That's pretty much it.
Like if you're trying to do it in some top-down way, you're gonna just land in Scrum and daily meetings and every this, that, and the other, because now management has to come in and they're the ones that have to go through.
And they will. They'll come in and they'll say, "Why isn't it happening? What's not happening?" And there will be no awareness that the processes that they've put in place are actually causing this pain, right? But it comes from a lack of trust. It comes from a lack of people, the team, not holding each other accountable, not doing the best you can do, not kind of having that passion, that desire to do what it is that you're doing. So if you're in a job that you don't like, find a different job. There are plenty of jobs, around. You got to do something you're passionate in, and if you can't, you got to try and find a way to be passionate about it, because otherwise, self-fulfilling prophecy. You're gonna end up in the position that you're in, and you're unhappy about.
Through and do all this stuff, and then it's just awful. Like, I don't want that. Terrible. Do you want that? I don't want that. But I love my Scrum mommy. Well, we all love our Scrum mommy, okay?
Scrum daddy.
Okay. But only one team gets a Scrum mommy, and that ain't me, okay? First off, I don't believe that. I don't believe this at all. Right here. I cannot create my team, and 30 million is on the line, and contracts with deadlines are in effect. If we fire people, I have no one to replace them. BS. If you literally paid people a good wage, a competitive wage, whatever that...
Again, not something controlled by engineering, often. Very different. Being in an in-house versus an agency, something that's focused on billing.
Competitive is for your area. Slightly better, 5% better, 10% better, whatever it is, you will literally have a load of developers knocking on your door right now saying,
True.
Pay me, I'll do the work good. And you can just hand pick right now great talent. Okay? There are people desperate for jobs right now.
It's very much true. Layoffs obviously affected the US probably more so than they did the UK, but very much true. People definitely tightening the purse strings. And one way to secure your position is to stand out, is to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable, is to try and be self-organizing, prove to management that the process they put in place, because they lost trust in development and engineering, can be built back up, and we can do less micromanaging and be in a position that is better and more advantageous for engineering, for development, for actually getting things done, and which is their goal in the first place. They want to spend less money on building the things so they can have more profit. It's all about that bottom line at the end of the day.
This idea that somehow, I understand tribal knowledge is really important, and you can't just get rid of an entire team and then come back and create a new one, right? It's not that easy, right? People are really, 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 really wanting to work. There's plenty, that is not, right?
Yeah, and I think really that kind of hits the nail, that kind of hits the nail on the head. People do want to work. There are people that are passionate, but you can't necessarily control that yourself. So you really have to take it within, and that's why I titled the video is that you are the reason that your team sucks. Because if you're not doing everything you can do, and you're not holding other people accountable, you're not having those conversations, then what can you expect from other people? You have to lead by example, and it isn't always easy, but maybe it's time for you to move on. If you're not finding what you need, and if you've escalated it and you've raised those concerns, then what more can you do than be the change that you want to see? And that's pretty much what I've got to say. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested to know what other people's experiences these are. I've worked as a contractor for coming up to 15 years now. Worked on many different organizations, in-house agencies, blah blah blah, and it's a problem that you faced a lot more so in agencies. But it can affect all teams of all shapes and sizes, all different sorts of companies. So definitely interested in hearing your experience. Peace.